What's going on, guys? It's fight season MMA, and today I want to make a video talking about the UFC welterweight division and kind of make a full UFC welterweight breakdown. I've done a couple of these prior on my channel. I did a UFC bantamweight breakdown, UFC lightweight breakdown, but we're going to move up to 170 pounds today to talk about the UFC welterweight division. In my opinion, the welterweight division is kind of a blossoming division inside the UFC, and not a lot of people are talking about how deep, how talented the UFC welterweight division is, and I kind of want to go and genuinely talk about why I believe the UFC welterweight division is an incredible division inside the organization as a whole. And I kind of want to talk about why I believe that there's going to be a lot of good welterweight fights coming up at the end of this year and next year as well. I know we have Vincente Luque versus Nick Diaz. We have Ian Garry versus Joaquin Buckley. Possibly a welterweight title fight at UFC 309 with Colby Covington or Kamaru Usman stepping in there with Shavkat Rakhmonov, and a bunch of different things going on inside the UFC welterweight division. But we will kind of break down all the fighters in the top 15 of the current UFC welterweight division, kind of rate them on a pound-for-pound scale, in my opinion, not what the UFC has for their rankings, but kind of talk about what my official rankings for the UFC welterweights are currently. But without further ado, let's rank and talk about each current UFC top 15 ranked welterweight, 1 to 15, plus the champion, Belal, remember the name Muhammad as well. But if you guys enjoy the UFC content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. That is the best way to help the channel grow. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications, just so you guys are always and furtherly notified about UFC content releasing every single day. But without further ado, let's jump right into the video talking about the top 15 UFC welterweights and kind of breaking down the division as a whole. Number 15 inside the UFC welterweight division in the UFC's rankings is Carlos the Nightmare Prates. Carlos Prates just actually fought this past weekend, KOing Neil Magny within the first round. And Carlos Prates, I think, is one of the best prospects the UFC lightweight division has right now. I know that there's some other prospects like Michael Morales, who we'll get into later, Ian Garry, Della, Maddalena, Joaquin Buckley, but I do think that Carlos Prates has some of the brightest future in front of him genuinely, because I think that he has one of the best striking games the UFC welterweight division has seen in a very long time. He's also got good takedown defense, which he was able to put on display against Neil Magny, and incredible power, which was 100% put on all of his fights, has been put on in display, especially with that Li Jingliang fight knocking him down in the second round, and the Neil Magny fight getting the KO 4 minutes and 50 seconds within round 1. I actually made a short about Carlos Prates, so I'll link that right here. But Carlos Prates, in my opinion, should be ranked number 9 inside the UFC welterweight division. And a lot of you guys might be sitting here, oh my God, why can you put Prates so high? I have seen so much out of this man in his first 4 fights in the UFC that not a lot of these other welterweights have been able to put on display. I think Carlos Prates is a once-of-a-generation type talent, and I truly don't want to rank him too high, considering that there's a lot of other welterweights currently inside the UFC who are super good. But genuinely, I do think that Carlos Prates is an amazing fighter inside the UFC welterweight division, and going from number 15 in the UFC's rankings to number 9 on my rankings, I think is 100% valid to have. At number 14 inside the UFC welterweight division, I got Vincente Luque, and in my rankings, he's actually down at number 15. Vincente Luque hasn't been the same fighter ever since he fought Geoff Neal, which he had an incredible brain hemorrhage, which was one of the most sad injuries I've ever seen inside the UFC. He got hit so hard, got pieced up by Geoff Neal in that fight, and that just shows why Geoff Neal is an incredible pocket boxer, if he's actually higher up on this list, and how hard Geoff Neal hits on. But Vincente Luque has fought Joaquin Buckley since then, and he just hasn't really been able to show and prove to himself that he is the same fighter inside the organization. Vincente Luque is coming back against Nick Diaz in the UFC 310 main card, and I do think that's going to be a very good fight. But Luque genuinely just isn't the same as he's been over his past part of his career, and I do think that putting him at number 15 inside my rankings, down 1 spot from number 14, that I think is an incredibly valid thing to do. At number 13 inside the UFC welterweight rankings is Michael Venom Page, and actually in my rankings, I have him staying at the number 13 spot. I think Michael Venom Page is a great fighter. He might be the best striker inside the UFC welterweight division. Seeing that fight against Ian Garry really showed me that Michael Venom Page has a one-of-a-kind striking game in the UFC welterweight division. He's so good. He is so fast. Even though he's 36, 37 years old, he is so fast, so agile, and so smart on the feet. And I do think that that plays a lot a part to his Bellator days and his kickboxing career and that taekwondo that he kind of possesses inside the UFC. I do think that Michael Venom Page, though, has a massive hole inside the grappling department. If he went up against any individual who can grapple above him or below him, he would absolutely lose that fight. Michael Morales Joaquin Buckley, Gilbert Burns, Ian Gary, Colby Covington, Sean Brady, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Kamaru Usman, and Belal Muhammad would all be names that would beat Michael Venom Page. But genuinely, I think Page is such a good fighter, and I do think that he has not the longest time inside the UFC welterweight division. I can't see him becoming UFC welterweight champion, but I do think that Michael Venom Page is a very exciting fighter, and if he can get his grappling game back up, paired with one of the best striking games inside the UFC currently, I truly do think that he can make a push into the top 5 inside the UFC welterweight division. Number 12 inside the UFC welterweight division is Michael Morales. I have him going down to number 15. His last fight was against Neil Magny, which he was able to get that win, but he really hasn't had a great fight inside the UFC to get wins. I understand that he was able to finish Neil Magny. Not a lot of people have been able to do that, but he's beat Trevin Giles, not a great welterweight. Fugit, who fought Mike Malott and lost. Malott beat him too, and Mike Malott hasn't been one of the best prospects. He beat Jake Matthews. He's a pretty good fighter. And Neil Magny himself getting the sub in the first, or the KO, TKO in the first round was a good thing, but I don't think that right now he has proven himself to the best of his ability. I do think that he can get another couple fights ahead of him, and genuinely, I do think that there is a lot of individuals inside the UFC welterweight division that I would put above Michael Morales. Although, great prospect coming up, has 17 wins, 0 losses, no decisions, no anything else. Great prospect. I think he's got a bright future inside the welterweight division, but I would love to see him go up against some more high-level competition. At number 11 inside the UFC welterweight division is Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and I have him sliding down one spot to number 12. I think Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is a great fighter coming from that Taekwondo background, South Carolina. Great individual, probably the nicest UFC fighter that has ever been placed inside the UFC organization. He is just a stand-up guy, and I love seeing him fight every single time. He's only taken on the hardest competition every single time. Fought Joaquin Buckley in his last one, Shavkat Rakhmonov in the fight before that. He's fought Gilbert Burns, Belal Muhammad. He's fought the who's who inside the UFC welterweight division, and I genuinely think that Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is one of the best welterweights to ever be had. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, though, is a little bit older. He's had those times where he fought Tyron Woodley twice, and he's fought the who's who's and whatnot, and I think that age is catching up with him a little bit. Even though he still is looking good, I do think that last KO from Joaquin Buckley is possibly going to do something to him inside the organization. But genuinely, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson on my list is number 12. I wish he could be higher, but the UFC welterweight division has a lot of good fighters. I do think that since Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is a little bit older, I think that putting him down one slot in my welterweight division would be a very good thing to do. At number 10 inside the UFC welterweight division is Geoff Hands of Steel Neal, and he was lighting up RDA in that last fight that he had at UFC Abu Dhabi at UFC 308, and I do have Geoff Neal slotting down one spot, kind of just like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, to go to the number 11th rank in my rankings. I do think that Geoff Neal is a great fighter. He's got a lot of power, and he scraps in there every single time, and considering that he lost his last 2 fights prior to beating RDA, those 2 fights weren't against bad opponents. He fought Shavkat, who was an absolute monster in there, and who we're going to talk about a little bit later, and Ian Machado Garry as well, who we're going to talk about a little bit later. Geoff Neal has fought the who's who in the welterweight division as well. Maybe not the same as Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, but he has fought 2 of the best phenoms coming up through the welterweight division, and yes, has lost to both of them, but I don't think that that's a knock on Geoff Neal's name, rather than a great win for both of those guys. I do think that Geoff Neal is a staple inside the UFC welterweight division, even though that he might not be a top 10 or top 5 fighter. He's still a great established top 12, 10 fighter inside the UFC welterweight division. I do have him at number 11. I do think that the people like Carlos Prates are better than him. I do think that there's a lot of individuals inside the UFC who are better than him inside the welterweight division. But Geoff Neal, staple inside the welterweight division, and one of my favorite welterweights inside the organization. At number 9 ranked inside the UFC welterweight division currently is Mr. Joaquin Buckley, and I actually have Buckley moving up one spot, going up to number 8. Joaquin Buckley is such a good fighter. I look at him fighting this year. He's fought 3 times this year. Beat Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, very close back and forth fight. You didn't know who was winning that fight. Buckley said, "Don't need the judges' scorecards." Got the 3rd round KO, an incredible KO. He also fought Nursultan Ruzaboyev earlier this year to co-headline UFC St. Louis. That was back in May. No one was going out there and willingly fighting Ruzaboyev, and Joaquin Buckley said, "I want to headline my card. This is a guy that we got. Let me step in there and do it." got the decision victory over Ruzaboyev, a great win in my opinion, and he got into the UFC top 15 welterweight division against Vincente Luque. Like I said, he kind of didn't look the same, but I do think that beating Ruzaboyev and beating Stephen Wonderboy Thompson are two amazing wins. And guess what? He's fighting one more time this year, last card of the year, fighting Ian Machado Garry, UFC Tampa main event. Great fight. Cannot wait to watch that one. But genuinely, Joaquin Buckley was a former middleweight. As he's come down to the welterweight division, he's won 5 in a row. And I do think that Joaquin Buckley's got a bright future in front of him inside the UFC welterweight division, considering that he knows how to switch up the striking and the grappling department to truly allow him to be one of the most well-rounded fighters in the welterweight division. In my opinion, Joaquin Buckley's number 8. The UFC has him at number 9. Not that much of a discourse, but genuinely, Joaquin Buckley's a great fighter. At number 8 inside the UFC welterweight division, we have Gilbert Burns, and Gilbert Burns is on a 2-fight loss streak, but the guys he's lost to, kind of like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and Geoff Neal, aren't bad losses inside the welterweight division. Burns is a little bit of an older fighter. He recently got annihilated by Sean Brady in a main event in September at the UFC Apex, and he lost to Jack Della Maddalena at UFC 299, which that fight he was winning very handily, but Jack Della Maddalena timed a perfect knee at the end of round 3, which ultimately got him the TKO victory. Gilbert Burns has one of the best jiu-jitsu fighters the UFC has in it right now, and still is. He's top 5 up there with people like Sean Brady and some other different individuals, Charles Oliveira, but Gilbert Burns might be the greatest UFC Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter the organization has ever seen, and I truly think that even though he has an old age, he still looked incredibly spry in those roles with Jack Della Maddalena and Sean Brady, and I truly do think that he is one of the best welterweights still. I know Burns doesn't have the same gas take. He doesn't look like he can kind of do the same things as he once used to be able to do, even like a year or two ago, but Gilbert Burns, an amazing fighter inside the UFC welterweight division, and I truly have him moving up one slot to the number 7 slot currently in the rankings. At number 7, Ian Machado Garry. Ian Garry, one of the best fighters inside the UFC welterweight division. As I kind of touched on it earlier, he has an upcoming fight with Joaquin Buckley, which I do think is a very good fight to prove a ton of stuff in that division. You got 2 of the best prospects in the welterweight division. I know Buckley's not necessarily a quote-unquote prospect, but he has fought inside the organization for a very long time. But ever since he's moved down to welterweight, he's looked like a completely different fighter. I do think that this is a very good matchup for Ian Garry, and I think a very exciting matchup for both fighters. Ian Garry's first 5-round main event, Buckley's first 5-round main event, but we'll kind of see. Ian Garry at my number 6 slot, I do think is a very, very, very good thing to be had, because I do think that Ian Garry, he showed in his last fight that yes, he might not be the best grappler, but he can go and resort to it if he really needs to. I know he said he was going to go in there and beat Michael Venom Page in the striking department. Not a lot of people can do that, and there's no shame in doing so, but I think a lot of fans kind of turned on Ian Garry because he said all that different type of stuff, and they didn't understand how good of a striker Michael Venom Page was. So Garry wrestled and grappled his way to a decision. Kind of a boring fight, but genuinely, Ian Garry, one of the best welterweights inside the organization. He's an incredibly intelligent and smart fighter, has got a great frame on him, 6'3", long arms, long legs, great leg kicks. He kind of knows what he does every time inside the welterweight division, and genuinely, I am a massive Ian Machado Garry fan, and I cannot wait to see him come back and fight Joaquin Buckley. At number 6 inside the UFC welterweight division currently is Colby Covington, and I'm slotting Colby Covington down to number 10. If I look, Colby Covington doesn't have a ranked win inside the UFC anymore. Zabit, I'm not even going to try to say his last name. Zabit has more ranked wins, and he hasn't fought inside the UFC since 2019. Colby Covington has fought Tyron Woodley. He's fought some other guys, but genuinely, Colby Covington has only lost to Kamaru Usman. He lost to Leon Edwards in his last one at UFC 296. I know he's just thrown himself into an interim title fight with Shavkat Rakhmonov, but Colby Covington needs to prove himself against any other of these UFC welterweights, and I don't want to drop him all the way down to 15 because I do think that Colby Covington is still a good fighter. I just don't know how much he really wants it. He's kind of turned into a big poker player. He's kind of been doing this thing with Donald Trump, supporting him and all that category, whether you like Trump or not. Colby's been down that category, and truly I do think that he has not been as focused on fighting as he really has needed to be to push inside the top 5 of the UFC welterweight rankings. At Colby Covington's peak, he was probably the greatest welterweight besides Kamaru Usman, and he would have been champion if Kamaru Usman wasn't a thing, but genuinely, Colby Covington right now needs to prove to me that he can beat one of these UFC-ranked welterweights, and I do think that possibly a fight that he was kind of talking about with Jack Della Maddalena. I know that that's a kind of a massive jump up for Colby Covington, but as we've said, Colby kind of will fight whoever he wants, and I think that would be a great fight with him. But Colby Covington is set to return pretty soon, apparently. That's coming from Colby, not from me, and I hopefully can't wait to see him fight. But as of right now, I have him ranked number 10 inside the UFC welterweight division. At number 5, it actually has him tied with 4th at the UFC welterweight division, but I'm going to keep him at number 5, is Jack Della Maddalena. And on my list, I have Jack Della Maddalena at number 5. He's a great boxer inside the UFC welterweight division. He might be the best technical boxer the welterweight division has right now, and I do think that he is a massive contributor to be a possible title challenger in the near future. Jack Della Maddalena, though, has a very interesting style, and the thing that makes me not want to rank him any higher is because that he has such a heavy boxing style that I think a lot of these grapplers would be able to beat him, as we saw with Gilbert Burns. Jack Della Maddalena, such high IQ. He just didn't know what to do in every single position on the ground against Burns. Now, he ultimately was able to eke out a TKO victory in that 3rd round at UFC 299, but I do think that Della Maddalena does have some unfavorable matchups. I don't know if he could beat Shavkat. I don't know if he could beat Usman, and I don't know if he could beat Sean Brady. And even someone like Colby Covington, if he's back to prime Colby Covington form, I don't know if he could beat Colby, but genuinely, I think Jack Della Maddalena is going to be a prominent force inside the UFC welterweight division for a very long time. I cannot wait to see him return very, very soon. He's a very fun, intelligent fighter, and I do think that keeping him at number 5 from the UFC's welterweight rankings and my rankings, I think is the proper thing to do. At number 4 inside the UFC welterweight rankings is Sean Brady, and he is actually tied with Jack Della Maddalena, but I'm going to put him at number 4. I think Sean Brady's a great fighter, but on my list, I have Sean Brady at number 3. Sean Brady, in my opinion, is probably the most underrated UFC welterweight, and you can take that as a hot take or whatnot. I think Sean Brady is going to be a future UFC champion. Sean Brady has the best grappling maybe in the UFC, and no one is talking about it. I know you got Islam Makhachev. I know you got Charles Oliveira. I know you got Hamza Chimaev. I know you even got people like Dricus du Plessis, but Sean Brady technically is maybe the best grappler inside the organization. You look at his fight with Gilbert Burns. Burns, probably the best jiu-jitsu artist inside the UFC welterweight division. Or maybe even inside the entire UFC, that matter of fact. Sean Brady was able to go in there, neutralize positions, get positions, ultimately win a decision over Gilbert Burns. I don't remember what the exact scorecards were, but in my opinion, it was incredibly impressive. I do think that Sean Brady's next fight should be with someone like Leon Edwards. I think that would be a great matchup for Sean Brady, considering that Leon isn't necessarily the best takedown artist. But the biggest thing that has elevated Sean Brady, in my opinion, because even when he fought Belal Muhammad or fought these other guys like Michael Chiesa, he didn't really have a striking game with him. But when he fought Gilbert Burns, his striking looked incredibly clean, crisp, looked on time. It looked perfect for what he needed to do to ultimately get that fight to the ground. Sean Brady is one of my favorite fighters to watch inside the organization, has great Brazilian jiu-jitsu, great grappling game, incredibly intelligent, and is just someone who I think has a chance to become an incredible welterweight and possibly a future champion very, very soon. Number 3 ranked inside the UFC welterweight division is the man who should be fighting for the title, and I don't know exactly when this is going to go down because Belal Muhammad, the current champion, pulled out with a bone infection in his toe, but that being Shavkat Rakhmonov. Shavkat Rakhmonov is easily the scariest man in the welterweight division, and I have him as my number 1 ranked fighter, and I kind of keep Belal Muhammad on top, but in my opinion, I think he's better than Belal. Shavkat is an absolute amazing fighter. He's from Kazakhstan. He's crazy, 6'1", 18 fights, 18 finishes, KOs, even submissions. He's crazy. I love Shavkat. He's probably the most entertaining fighter, in my opinion, inside the UFC. He fought his last fight against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, had a bad ankle in that one, and absolutely went in there and swallowed him whole. Got the 2nd round KO, being the first person to ever finish Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in a fight. Shavkat Rakhmonov, incredibly intelligent, always puts on barn burners, and I hope a fight with Belal Muhammad will end up going down. Shavkat's the boogeyman of the UFC welterweight division. I don't think there's any single person who can beat him no matter what style. You put someone like a kickboxer like Leon Edwards against him, someone like Jack Della Maddalena, I think they'll lose to him, or even someone like a wrestler but like Belal Muhammad, Kamaru Usman, or Sean Brady. I just think that Shavkat is that good. I think Shavkat has a chance to become one of the best UFC welterweights of all time, and the fight that I cannot wait to hopefully see would be Shavkat beating Belal Muhammad at UFC 310 or whenever that comes. I like Belal as a champion. I can't lie. He is definitely better than Leon Edwards, but I cannot wait to see Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Islam Makhachev if that fight were to go down. Ultimately, Shavkat Rakhmonov, best fighter in the welterweight division, but for this video's sake, I have him moving up from the UFC's ranking from number 3 to my ranking of number 1 inside the division. The number 2 ranked UFC welterweight currently within the organization is Kamaru Usman, and I actually have Usman staying at the number 2 spot, and I'll tell you why. Kamaru Usman didn't look his best after that Leon Edwards KO, but I do think he came back a little bit too early. The fight that really made me appreciate how good Kamaru Usman was, considering Khamzat Chimaev's last performance, was that actual fight with Khamzat Chimaev that he took up on 10 days' notice. I think Kamaru Usman would have beat Chimaev if that was a 5-round fight. Considering that Usman, yes, he went up a division, so his cardio wasn't hampered, but he had no time to train for that fight. And I do think that Kamaru Usman having the championship experience, still being one of the best welterweights in the world, I think possibly couldn't win in there and won a 5-round decision with Khamzat Chimaev, one of the scariest fighters within the organization right now up at middleweight. Kamaru Usman, I think, could have beat Leon Edwards the third time if they ended up fought. He was winning that second fight, and I truly think that third fight, he just came back too fast. I do think that Kamaru Usman should fight for the UFC welterweight title if they are going to make an interim title with Shavkat at UFC 310, kind of set up Belal Muhammad, just promote that fight even more. I know that there shouldn't be an interim title made, but considering that Belal pulled out, that might be the easiest thing to do to save UFC 310. Ultimately, Kamaru Usman, great fighter. I do think that he is better than Leon Edwards still. I think he came back a little bit too early. We'll talk about Leon next, but Kamaru Usman, great fighter, and is currently my number 2 ranked, as well as the UFC's number 2 ranked welterweight currently. Number 1 ranked UFC welterweight in the organization is Mr. Leon Edwards. And Leon Edwards, in my opinion, actually moves down to number 4 inside the UFC welterweight division. I kind of want to talk to you about why. First off, there's a couple different reasons. First, I want to say Leon's heart. I know that he had that incredible knockout over Kamaru Usman, but he's never been a fighter to go in there and finish fights regularly. And I do think that Leon Edwards does have a great, head on his shoulders, but I do think I wish he had that dog, that killer mentality in him a little bit more. Also, Leon Edwards' style is super kicking dependent, and that was shown in this fight with Belal Muhammad and the fight with Kamaru Usman. In that fight with Kamaru Usman, that third fight, his first title defense, he was able to keep Kamaru at range, pepper him with kicks over and over and over again, and that's what made that style. It makes Leon's fighting look like a shadow boxing performance every time he's in there. But when he fought Belal Muhammad, Belal was cutting off the space. He was doing everything he needed to. And since Leon wasn't able to get his kicks going, Belal was able to swarm him and swamp him in every single category. And also, I think Leon Edwards his cardio has always been questionable inside the UFC. Even though in that fight with Kamaru Usman the second time, he got tired really quick. I know that was at altitude, but even with this fight against Belal Muhammad, the fight was in Manchester, England, and Leon Edwards looked dead tired at the end of that fight. Ultimately, Leon Edwards is the UFC's number 1 ranked opponent, considering that he was the former champion, but I do think that his championship run was a little bit flukish. I made a video on that. If you guys want to go talk about it or see it, I'll leave it right here. It was a while ago that I talked about Leon Edwards being kind of a fraudulent champion, but ultimately, Leon Edwards, great fighter. I have him at the number 4 ranked UFC welterweight because I think that Sean Brady, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Kamaru Usman would all beat Leon right now. Number 1 UFC welterweight, or the champion, I should say at this point, and obviously my number 1 is Belal Muhammad. Belal Muhammad is a great fighter, great performance against Leon Edwards at UFC 304. Absolutely went in there. I didn't think that Belal Muhammad would have anything on Leon. Swarmed him, swamped him. Absolutely won that fight 48-47 in my opinion, although he was winning that 5th round incredibly controllingly, and he kind of let off the brakes for Leon to get that massive elbow, splitting him open. But Belal Muhammad, a great fighter. He's on like an 11-fight win streak, or an 11-fight unbeaten streak, I believe. He's beat the likes of Gilbert Burns. He's beat Sean Brady. I think he's also beat Geoff Neal. He's beat a lot of different guys in there. And genuinely, Belal Muhammad, I think, is a very charismatic and good champion for the organization because he's finally bringing light back to the welterweight division. I know when Leon Edwards was champion, the welterweight division was kind of dormant. No one looked at it. Everyone thought it was awful. But ever since Belal has been back, he's kind of wanted to get on that Alex Pereira schedule. And he was going to turn around very quickly prior to that bone infection in his foot. But hopefully sometime earlier next year, UFC 312, 313, we get to see Belal Muhammad defend against his belt, maybe against Shavkat Rakhmonov, maybe against the winner of Shavkat and Usman. We will see. But ultimately, I do think that Belal Muhammad is the champion for a reason. I do think that the only person right now who could beat Belal Muhammad would be Shavkat Rakhmonov. I do think that Shavkat is such a good fighter, and even then, that would be an incredibly hard fight for Shavkat and for Belal as well. Those are kind of two styles that really don't mix with one another, but ultimately, Belal is the champion. You got to respect him, and I do think that he is probably the best welterweight inside the organization, if not Shavkat Rakhmonov. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA. And kind of real quick, I want to go over my list of my top 15 ranked welterweights. I know the UFC's list is online, but I wanted to make my own rankings as well, which I've done in every single other video. At number 15, I got Vincente Luque. At number 14, I have Michael Moraes. At number 13, I have Michael Venom Page. Number 12, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Number 11, Geoff Hands of Steel Neal. Number 10, Colby Covington. At number 9, Carlos the Nightmare Prates. Number 8, Joaquin Buckley. Number 7, Gilbert Burns. Number 6, Ian Machado Garry. Number 5, Jack Della Maddalena. Number 4, Leon Rocky Edwards. Number 3, Sean Brady. Number 2, Kamaru Usman. Number 1, Shavkat Rakhmonov. And the champion is, of course, Belal Muhammad. Ultimately, the UFC welterweight division is in a great place right now, and I genuinely think that there's going to be some incredibly exciting fights coming very soon. I know Shavkat is the guy who really wants to fight. I know Sean Brady kind of wants to fight. Jack Della wants to fight, but the biggest person who wants to fight currently is Belal Muhammad, holding that title and wanting to turn around very quickly. Considering what he's seen out of Alex Pereira defending the belt so many times this year, I truly think that Belal Muhammad is influenced by that, and he wants to get on that schedule to become one of the greatest welterweights of all time. Now, can he do it? That's a very big question. He's got a very, very, very tough challenge ahead of him in Shavkat Rakhmonov or even Kamaru Usman next, but truly, I do think that Belal Muhammad's career is incredible, and I do think that he has a chance to go down as one of the best welterweights of all time. Like I said, the welterweight division is incredibly stacked right now, in my opinion. You got some great fighters from top to bottom who really have a chance to shake up and push for a championship run themselves. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy the UFC content. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications just so you guys are always and furtherly notified about future UFC content releasing every single day. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.